Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Join us today as we talk about protecting ourselves from space. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another Advanced Studio Classroom. I am your host for today. My name is Simon, and you're joining me for the August 1st space lesson. This lesson is called Challenges in Space, and the subtitle is The Race to Defend Against Space and Celebrating the Work of a Rover on Mars. Well, we're not going to talk about the rover on Mars part in this lesson, but we are going to talk about defending ourselves against space. Now, that's a very interesting line because when I read that, the first thing I thought about was aliens, right?
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I have two panelists with me today, both of whom may or may not believe in aliens. That's not really the issue, but we'll ask them anyway. Manya, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Simon.
How do you feel about aliens?
I'm unsure.
There you go.
I don't know.
That is a wise answer, isn't it? Yeah, to that sort of question. And Jack Smith. Welcome back, Jack.
Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it.
Jack, do you want to commit to your feelings about aliens here in public today?
Sure. I'll say sure. They're aliens.
Jack is going to go with the statistical situation. So many planets, so many stars. There you go. Another safe answer, I suppose. I am not going to publicly declare my feelings on aliens because that is not what this article is about. Despite the fact we say the race to defend against space, we're not talking about defending ourselves from aliens. That phrase, though, the race to defend against something, we don't usually think of defending ourselves as a race, but that actually is a fairly commonly used phrase when you're talking about things like national defense. We talk about like an arms race or, things like that. What exactly does that mean, Jack?
Well, it means that you're going to try to prepare to defend yourself, and you are in a race against the time or the situation where you might have to defend. Basically, in this case, they're racing to prepare themselves against things that could come in from space, and they have to do it before those things arrive.
Yeah, when we use this term, we're not necessarily talking about racing towards a deadline, which is another way we use this word race. Instead, we are usually talking about racing against someone else, like competing with someone else. And the idea here is that different countries, or in this case, maybe different planets, that's back to the alien thing again. So we're not talking about different planets here, but basically you're competing to get newer technology and more weapons and more resources and things like that so that you can be more powerful than your competitor. And the idea is that you will be well prepared if anything terrible ever happens. So what is the big risk that we are defending ourselves against in this lesson today, Manya?
Well, basically a rock.
A rock?
No, an asteroid.
An asteroid. Now, what exactly is an asteroid?
An asteroid is...
it's a rock.
It's a rock.
Yes. It's probably... They come in all sizes. Some of them are very big rocks, right? Some of them are just the size of like a car or a bus or something. Some of them are even larger. But they're basically what we call space debris or space junk. It's just rocks flying around in space.
Okay. Now, sometimes we talk about space junk, and we're talking about like little pieces of satellites or things like that. It's kind of a related term, though, because often asteroids are, former pieces of planets that have had things happen to them long ago or different things like that. And so the next question I have before we get into this reading is, what is the difference between the word asteroid and the word meteor? Because, I've heard of things like a meteor shower, and I've heard of things like asteroids, but both of those are usually described as, kind of space rocks. So what's the difference between those two terms?
From what I understand, only size.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We could have totally different understandings of this then, Jack. I actually understood that a meteor was a thing that was hitting the Earth.
Oh,
and an
you're
asteroid
right.
was like a thing that was...
You're right.
Floating
If it
in
enters
space.
the atmosphere, it becomes a meteor. That's right. That's correct.
Now, listeners, you are welcome to tell me if I'm completely wrong about this, and you would do so by writing us a letter at letters@studioclassroom.com. I'm using background information here that I picked up probably 15, 20 years ago when I was studying science, so that definition could be a little dated.
I'll throw another one out there. What is a comet?
Oh, no. That's really hard. Tell us, what is a comet, Jack?
Oh, you don't know? A comet has not only rock, but usually some kind of ice or frozen liquid, and that's why they get a tail as they fly through space. They let off like dust from the ice, or when they get into an atmosphere, they heat up or they get close to it, and then they release the tail of vapor.
Fantastic. So you can kind of see them flying.
Exactly, yeah.
Space. Such an exciting thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, we're finding out today about a special program that is meant to defend us against asteroids that are going to hit us. Because, of course, that's the sort of thing that you would see as the subject of many movies. The one I think about right away is that movie Armageddon. It's a kind of an older movie now. It had Ben Affleck in it and
Bruce
what was the other?
Willis.
Bruce Willis, that's right.
Yeah.
And there was a giant asteroid coming to Earth, and they had to fly up into space to destroy the asteroid and save the planet. Fortunately, this plan we're going to talk about today doesn't involve sending people up into space to land on an asteroid.
Yeah. Thank goodness.
Yeah, fortunately, because that was a wild sci-fi movie. This is maybe a little more practical. So let's get into the idea. This lesson today is actually called Team Builds Spacecraft to Crash into an Asteroid and Shove It Off Course, which is a really good literal description, but we'll talk about that after we do our first reading. So listeners, you can find the first reading if you look in your advanced magazine this month. That's the August magazine, and we're going to be looking at page 10 for this reading.
Challenges in space. The race to defend against space and celebrating the work of a rover on Mars. Team builds spacecraft to crash into an asteroid and shove it off course. A team of scientists, astronomers, and engineers meets weekly in a conference room on a Howard County, Maryland, research campus and plans to save the world. Keep calm and carry DART, reads a poster on the wall. DART, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, is their plan to avert catastrophe. It's also NASA's first mission not to explore space, but to defend against it. The research team at the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory plans to launch a spacecraft, speed it up really fast, and smash it into an asteroid. Boom! The impact, they hope, will bump the big space rock off course. Actually, more like nudge it slightly. Someday, the thinking goes, this method may save humans. Kind of like a big missile, said Elena Adams, the mission's lead engineer. It's very exciting. You are actually doing something for the fate of humanity. An estimated 100 tons of space debris falls to Earth every day, according to scientists with the NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology. This debris is mostly dust and sand.
Thanks so much for that great reading, Jack. While you were reading, Manya and I did a little bit of research to make sure we knew what the words asteroid, comet, and meteor meant, and we were mostly right. The only one we were a little bit wrong about is asteroids, which aren't really flying around through space like anywhere they want to go. They tend to be in orbit or flying around something like the sun. So kind of like a mini planet, I guess, but maybe on a different orbit than Earth.
Yes, and actually it mentioned, I remember you looking it up, and it said that they primarily lie in a specific area. It was between Mars and Jupiter, which is what we call the asteroid belt.
Wait a minute. That's where we are. Dun, dun, dun. Between Mars and Jupiter. That's why we need this program. This way to defend ourselves, because who knows what might happen if one of these asteroids hits us. So this lesson was called Team Builds a Spacecraft to Crash into an Asteroid and Shove It Off Course. Now, when something is on course, basically that's a path that it's followed, right? And so if you shove something off course, what exactly are you doing, Manya?
You're taking it off its path.
So you're giving it a push.
Yes.
And changing where it is going to.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, and so the idea here is that this spacecraft is supposed to just fly up and hit one of these rocks so hard that the rock goes somewhere else. It moves where it's going. That's the idea. Sounds like a great defense to me. Our reading began with a team of scientists, astronomers, and engineers meeting weekly in a conference room at this research campus to plan to save the world. Now, very quickly, we know that astronomers are scientists. What is really the difference between these terms? This is pretty basic vocabulary, but give me a quick breakdown. What's the difference between a scientist, an astronomer, and an engineer?
Sure. Okay, so my guess would be that, yes, of course, astronomers are scientists. So probably the scientists they are mentioning here have to do with other fields, like could be just physics in general, or maybe electrical or mechanical something. That might be more what the engineers are focusing on, I guess, would be probably the electrical engineering, mechanical,
Let me try to help you out there,
Sure.
Jack. Let me try to help you out. Science is a more general term. And so scientists are just people who are doing different kinds of science. And astronomers are doing a very specific kind of science. They're studying the stars and space and things that are going on up there. Engineers, it's kind of an interesting term, but it's basically a way we describe people who are applied sciences. So instead of looking at like theory and basic principles in science, they're finding ways to use the science. So they're looking for practical ways to use science. And so basically we have a wide range of really smart people here getting together to come up with plans to save the world. And how are they planning to do that, Manya?
Well, they want to use DART, which stands for Double Asteroid Redirection Test, and they want to use this robot, this spacecraft, this vehicle, to shove the asteroid off its course.
Okay. Now, they used this interesting phrase here that's actually been fairly common for the last few years in English. They say, keep calm and carry DART. And it's like a regular phrase that people use that actually came from the Second World War, but it's been changed a little bit. So what is the actual phrase people have been using a lot in the last few years?
Keep calm and carry on.
Carry on.
Yeah, it was a poster used by the British government to motivate the country during World War II.
Yeah, when they say carry on, they mean just keep doing what you normally do.
Yeah.
Right? So the idea is don't get all panicked and behave in a crazy way.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. That's the idea. And so people have modified that phrase a lot since it kind of became popular. So they'll say things like, keep calm and drink latte.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, if
Things
it's
like
a
that.
coffee shop, they'll use this advertisement slogan. Or they'll say, keep calm and, I don't know, carry a pencil box? If you're whatever.
Yeah.
So they've kind of modified the phrase repeatedly, and that's what we're seeing here. Except we're seeing this term. Now, you told us what it means, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, DART. But DART is actually kind of a good acronym to be using for something that you throw or you shoot at a spacecraft. Why is that? What's the other meaning for this word DART?
Sure. Well, for a noun, a dart is often some kind of it's a little missile. It's something that we can throw. It's usually a game, a toy that we play with. If you play darts, you throw it against a dartboard.
I always think of them as little arrows that you are throwing at a target. It's kind of a popular game that adults play. Children you don't usually want playing with darts too much, but they're sharp on one end and they have a weight and they have some little kind of feather things so they fly straight, and you throw them at the target and you see who can get closest to the center. So the idea is it's something you are throwing at a target, right? And that's why this is such a great acronym here, because they're throwing this. Now, you described it as a robot, like a spacecraft, but they're shooting it at a target. What is the target in this case?
Well, it's kind of like the little moon on a bigger asteroid, basically. So that's why I believe it's called the double asteroid redirection test, is they're actually going to try to hit a very small asteroid that is going around or orbiting a larger asteroid.
Okay, so there's some information hidden in this term, the double asteroid redirection test. So let's ignore the double asteroid part for right now as we're discussing, and we'll just talk about this idea of a redirection test. So redirection, that's exactly what we were talking about when we said change course or shove something off course. You force it to go in a new direction. But test, why would this be a test?
Well, I mean, they're hoping that if this is successful, then they can maybe perfect it and work on it even more and use it as a line of defense for Earth.
And I think I guess the point I am hoping to make to our listeners here is that this is a test because there isn't any big asteroid heading for Earth right now.
This asteroid is actually not going to collide with Earth.
We are not about to have this terrible event happen, and so they're testing this technology and process in case we ever find ourselves in a very serious situation.
That's right.
So this is part of the plan to avert catastrophe, and that's one of the words we're teaching today. When you're averting something, you're preventing it or avoiding it. Right?
Yes.
And a catastrophe is just a great word for describing a terrible, terrible event, right? Like a disaster. So you're avoiding a disaster when you avert catastrophe. Now, they use another acronym besides DART here. It's the one that listeners who regularly listen to the program know that I can never pronounce correctly.
I want to hear you say it all the same, though.
I don't know if it's because I'm Canadian or I'm from a rural area. I don't know what it is, but I always ask our American panelists to help me out how they pronounce it.
You say it first.
The term is NASA, and I always say NASA.
NASA.
But I know you don't. Help me out. How do you say it instead?
NASA.
NASA.
It's like an at the end. NASA.
Except to me, it seems clearly that it is not an It seems really like a Nassau to me.
It's okay, Simon. You can say it the way you say it.
Okay, so this NASA is, in fact, it's something closely akin to the National
Aeronautics and Space
Administration, meaning it's the space agency in the United States, right?
Yes.
I can't believe I'm still having trouble with this. We talk about this
We talk
almost
about it every
month, almost every month. But nonetheless, there it is. This is the first mission that NASA is conducting to not to explore space, but to defend against space. So this is the first time we have undertaken a project to protect ourselves from these terrible things in space. Okay, so this research team at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory plans to launch the spacecraft, speed it up really fast, and smash it into an asteroid boom. So that's a very clear description of what they are hoping to do. What is the boom about? Is that another acronym?
No, okay. So I know it's in all capital letters, but they're just putting it in capital letters to emphasize a loud explosion.
So that's basically what they're showing there is a sound. The sound that it's going to make when they speed this thing up and hit the asteroid.
Yes.
The impact they hope. So the impact is when the spacecraft hits it, when they strike each other. They hope this will bump the big space rock off course. Actually more like nudge it slightly. Now, what's the difference between a bump and a nudge?
Well, a nudge is more gentle. It's like a gentle push versus something that's more forceful.
I guess the point being the asteroid is so big that this tiny spacecraft isn't
strong enough to really bump it very far. Instead, it's going to nudge it gently off its course.
Okay. Someday the thinking goes, this method may save humans. Now, we have a quote here. How is it going to save humans, Manya?
Well, it's kind of like a big missile, and it's just going to bump it off. I'm sorry.
It's going to bump it off course. That's exactly it. So she describes it as a big missile, and this is Alina Adams. She's the lead engineer, and she sort of talks about how she feels about working on this project, right? She says, it's very exciting because you're actually doing something for the fate of humanity. Now, I just wanted to point out that word humanity in this paragraph because sometimes you'll hear people say other terms for this, like in particular, kind of the older, more traditional term is mankind, right? You especially hear this in a lot of space movies because space was very popular in the 1960s and 70s, and that would have been, even in the 1980s, sort of the preferred word. Now we tend to use this word humanity instead. So it tells us in the last paragraph of this reading that an estimated 100 tons of space debris, that's the term you use, Jack, space junk, falls to Earth every day, according to scientists, with Caltech's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And we've actually interviewed a scientist from Caltech's Jet Propulsion Laboratory on this program a number of years ago. But that debris is mostly dust or sand. That brings us to our second reading, which says, occasionally space sends something bigger. Listeners, you can find that on page 11. Let's do that reading now.
Occasionally, space sends something bigger. In February 2013, a fiery meteor cut across the Siberian sky. It came streaking down as fast as 40,000 miles per hour. Then came a mid-air explosion, a flash, and boom. The shockwave blew out windows across the Russian city of Chelyabinsk. A factory roof collapsed. More than 1,000 people were hurt, mostly from shattered glass. Scientists estimate the meteor unleashed a force stronger than the atomic bomb detonated in Hiroshima. The rock was about the size of a school bus. But smaller asteroids can unleash megatons of energy too. Even down to the 1 kilometer size, if it hits in the right spot, could cause global devastation, said Paul Chodas, who runs an asteroid search team at the NASA lab in California. It's the small asteroids that pose the risk, Chodas said.
So now this reading has placed fear back into my heart because we've been talking about this whole thing of an asteroid hitting the Earth, not being a thing that might really happen. And here we read right away that actually this has happened many times already. Most recently, just a few years ago in 2013. And we saw in 2013 that an asteroid actually became a meteor. So it hit the Earth, and it says there was a fiery meteor cutting across the Siberian sky. It came streaking down as fast as 40,000 miles per hour. Then came a mid-air explosion, a flash and a boom. So this meteor exploded in the middle of the air. And I guess the problem then wasn't so much that it hit the Earth. The problem was the shock wave that came from this mid-air explosion. And what did that shock wave do?
Well, it blew out windows across this Russian city of Chelyabinsk.
Chelyabinsk, yeah. So, and it tells us that a factory roof collapsed.
Yeah.
Now, I assume this factory roof collapsed just from the shock wave, not from being hit by anything, but
That's
an explosion so big that it, caused damage to buildings. More than 1,000 people were hurt, mostly from shattered glass. So that's a very serious sort of thing. We don't want that happening, especially with a bigger asteroid, right? Scientists estimate that the meteor unleashed a force stronger than the atomic bomb detonated in Hiroshima. And so that, of course, refers to an event at the end of World War II where the United States dropped a couple of atomic bombs on Japan. And so this meteor, the explosion that it had was, in fact, bigger than those nuclear atomic bomb blasts. So a very serious matter. It says that the rock was the size of a school bus. So that doesn't really seem all that big, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you consider how big things in space can be, it does seem like just a tiny piece of rock, but it's amazing that it can have that much force behind it.
Okay. And the bad news there is that smaller asteroids can unleash megatons of energy too. Now, this word megatons that we're using here, what exactly does that mean, Manya?
It means explosive power of energy.
So it's how we measure how
Yes.
big an explosion is. Right?
Yes.
So when we're talking megatons, we're really talking about like a nuclear bomb-sized explosion, not firecrackers or something like that, right? So even down to the 1 kilometer size, that means a meteor that's 1 kilometer across, I guess, if it hits in the right spot, could cause global devastation. Now, when we say global devastation, we really mean destruction all around the world. So not just a factory roof collapsing in an area near the meteor, but problems all around the world. And so it's the small asteroids that pose the risk, we hear. And so I suppose it is a good thing that NASA is working on this plan, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now, this space article that we've been discussing today is actually a 3-day article. So, listeners, I want to invite you to come back and join us tomorrow and again the next day as we continue discussing some of these issues surrounding space. Until then, I'm Simon.
Jack?
And I'm Manya.
Saying goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye.